When I was a young boy, I absolutely loved aviation. I loved airplanes. It was very exciting to go on trips on board airplanes. This was back in the early 1960s and late 1960s. My parents used to take me out to the local airport to watch the airplanes and take off and land. I loved them so much. And it was always very exciting when the family got together to go on an airplane trip. I used to wear a little tie and a little coat. My mom used to get my nice little black patent leather shoes out. And I always knew I would be an astronaut. Watching the astronauts on television was always very exciting. And I knew that 20 years later, that's what I would end up doing. In high school, my interest in math and science grew tremendously, basically because of a couple teachers. I had a super physics teacher, a super chemistry teacher, and also a super calculus teacher. And this just helped to build my interest in science and technology. Math, in particular, was kind of the cornerstone of that part of my education. Mr. Marvin Lamborn was my calculus teacher, and he really pushed us to learn math and to somehow apply it to science and technology. This, of course, was also the era of the great space flight. The space shuttle was just coming on board at that point, too. So seeing those on television really made it exciting and really made it feel like I wanted to fly into space. So I knew that once I would get to college, I would take up flying lessons and also pursue more academics in the area of math and science. I have really, really fond memories of high school because of the friendships I built and also the internal excitement that came with learning more about math and science. And also my involvement in sports. I tried to do many different things so that my life was well-rounded. One of the things I will always remember, and this was only 15 or 17 years ago, was how I often felt a little uncomfortable because I was doing so well in school, tended to study really hard, and didn't really hit all the social scene, and of course was working very hard in sports too. I often would walk down the halls at school and feel a little funny, like people were looking at me thinking that I wasn't really enjoying life as much as they were, or enjoying high school, and perhaps was even a little bit square with the term that we used back then. But I'll tell you, working that hard back then and doing really well in school and also doing really well in athletics helped me get where I wanted to go. So even though I felt funny at the time, it's obvious that it was the right thing to do, and actually ended up paying off because I feel like I now have one of the most exciting jobs that anyone has in the entire world. My parents played a huge role, obviously, in the success that I've had. I couldn't have asked for any more encouragement from anyone. They were always there encouraging me. Every sporting event I ever played in, they would travel to see. In fact, my senior year, I remember in Stanford, in water polo, they traveled great lengths to come to every single game to support me. And obviously, when there were times in school when I would suffer a setback, perhaps didn't do too well on a test or didn't feel too well prepared, they were always there to encourage me and reminded me that it wasn't necessarily a number of setbacks that someone came into contact with in their life. It was how you responded to those setbacks, and how blessed I am to have parents that always encouraged me and always reminded me that what the important things in life were to do, as well as my sister, who set an excellent role model for me. She's 5 years older than I am, and also just set an excellent role model and always encouraged me in my pursuit of excellence. College was a wonderful experience. I spent 7 years at Stanford University, and as you know, it's a very rounding experience. It has many different experiences. Not only do you have the scholastics, and Stanford was a fantastic scholastic school. In fact, I picked it because I knew that technically it was a great college, and I knew that if I wanted to be a professional engineer and hopefully an astronaut someday, it was a good school to go to for that reason. But also there were people from all over the United States and all over the world who brought all these experiences together. And so college wasn't just the scholastic experience, but also learning to meet people from all over the world and all over the United States. And of course, then there was the athletic side. Stanford's the most successful school in the United States in terms of NCAA rankings and championships. And playing water polo there was so much fun because I got to be part of this very successful team. We learned team building, things like that. And when people ask me what was one of the true, most important things in my career and how I got to where I wanted to be, I'd have to say college, because it not only provided this wonderful education, but also these wonderful rounding experiences, meeting other people, a really neat atmosphere to meet those folks, and also, of course, the athletic part is also very special. Right. There's lots of funny things about coming to this house, but every time I go downstairs to iron, I say to myself, I'm going to buy Joan a new ironing board cover because of that sturdy feet you have covering that ironing board down there. But you know that I know that that's just the cover, that there's really something underneath. But you know, you have a pretty wonderful family. Did you know that? You've raised your kids quite well. Yeah. And it's wonderful to be part of this family. You know that. Look at that wall of fame behind you, Charles.
Right.
You kids. I bet you're pretty proud of them.
Well, all of them, and you too. You're part of the team.
Now, which grandchild is the most beautiful of all of them?
Oh, wow. We don't answer that question.
We know it's the right answer.
No, we don't answer that.
I wonder what Shannon's doing. Shannon.
He'll be down in a minute.
Yeah.
What were your thoughts during that space shuttle launch? Were you guys nervous at all, or was it, were you nervous, or were you just in awe?
Anxious.
Anxious?
Anxious, and I suppose that borders on nervous, but
okay.
Pleased at the second time that it went very well.
Right.
Were you, did you think about what I was going through at that moment?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially the first one, when it didn't go and we thought it was a disappointment.
All the clocks had 0, 0, 0, 0.
Yeah.
It was set to go.
Yeah.
That still is kind of eerie to me to look at the videotapes because we have all those at home.
Great.
That's what I'm going to do. Is I'm going to put all that video footage together, and give you. In fact, I have one with me already. That's kind of all the raw footage from on board. Pretty interesting. Terrific.
Oh, I'll bet.
Yeah. Just because you can kind of hear how loud the shuttle is inside just the crew cabin there, and kind of what it's like to eat on the ceiling. The other thing you might find interesting is, Peggy and I had a private medical conference where she could see me, and we could talk to each other, but she could see me from space. We have a videotape of what she was seeing.
Okay.
Oh, really?
And that's really interesting.
She told, what was it, 15 minutes or something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I sang Shannon the Barney song.
Oh.
And,
Yeah, and Shannon
sang
that. Oh.
In fact, the San Jose Mercury News mentioned the fact that I sang a song about a purple diamond for my daughter.
When Steve first told me that he wanted to be an astronaut, I was surprised. Not because I didn't think he could do it, but because it's such an unusual dream. And we had been dating about 4 weeks. We were in the second year of a graduate program in business. So most of the men that I dated had dreams of being bankers, investment bankers, people in corporate careers. And so when he said those words to me, it was something that stopped me in my tracks for a couple reasons. First of all, I knew that meant he was going to be spending his life in Houston. And I had known him only 4 weeks, but I knew him well enough to know that I hoped we would be spending our lives together. So that meant I would be spending my life in Houston, which was something I had to think about. And secondly, it's a dangerous career. So To be very honest, I can't say that I was thrilled when he said that he wanted to be an astronaut, but I was definitely intrigued.
Did you think I could become an astronaut?
Yeah, I did. It's funny because there are so few astronauts, and some of the original astronauts are such icons, they're such heroes that seem to come from someplace else, that it was just interesting to me to meet somebody who had such a lofty goal, and I really felt like he had the right qualities to get there, and so it was just a question for me of where I fit in that dream.
Well, when I first met Peggy, I knew she was a special person, and actually almost knew immediately that it would end up the person I would marry. She was not only an attractive person, but also very easy to talk to, and we were in graduate school together at Stanford. And we finally met the second year of this graduate business school course, and we arranged to have lunch, and it was one of those opportunities where we sat for 2 hours having lunch, had difficulty finishing our sandwiches because we were so excited to talk to each other, and the time went by so quickly that it seemed like about a 10 or 15-minute lunch. So we arranged to meet again to go out to dinner. It turns out she took me to one of her friends' houses. It was a Korean family that she had befriended. And it was just the first of many very interesting experiences that Peggy's brought to my life. My folks, in fact, commented several times that Peggy really had calmed me down a little bit and kind of filled in, if you could consider your life a jigsaw puzzle, had helped me finish the border of my jigsaw puzzle, and now we're filling in the various pieces. So I always knew it would be a special, very special relationship. And I can remember the exact date. It was January 28th of 1987, when I brought Peggy home from a date when I knew I would marry her. That was only after knowing her for about 2 or 3 weeks.
In our generation, most of the couples have 2 careers, both the husband and the wife, and it's a juggling act, and it definitely was for Steve and I. As I mentioned, we met in graduate school and both pursuing careers of our own. My interest was in international affairs and international business, and I worked for Apple Computer for 7 years and traveled most of that time in Asia, all over South America, all over Europe, and really enjoyed the professional experiences that I had and didn't want to give those up. At the same time, I wanted to be able to support Steve and pursue his career. And so when it was clear that we needed to move to Houston, I felt it was important for me to maintain my own identity and my own professional activities totally outside of what Steve does at NASA. I started my own company, and I'm learning every step of the way how to do that, how to find clients, how to market, and how to sell my services. And I spend most of my time helping high technology companies in Texas find ways to make sales and establish business down in South America. So it's worked well for us, but to get there it required several years of commuting. I kept my job in California, and Steve started to pursue his career at NASA, and we made a commitment to each other that we would tolerate that kind of existence of being apart except for weekends so that we could both pursue what we really believed in and cared about. And I think that's probably what has made our marriage so strong now that we get to live together in the same place, which is much better.
I talk to young people because I feel like I have a lot of information to tell them, and I also think I have a very good story to tell them about how someone who really wants to do something and tries really hard and works really hard and actually can succeed. I also feel like I'm at the age still where they can identify with me. It's fun to be able to look at them and say, hey, just 15 years ago, I was sitting in a gymnasium just like this, and it was my dream at that time. So I think I have a great story and some great information to tell them, and I get great satisfaction out of the opportunity to talk to young people.
Unfortunately, scientists are at a point now where they can't come up with cures for some diseases because when they try and come up with a drug, a therapeutic drug that cures that disease, they have to go crystals of that drug. Well, when you try and go crystals, what's one of the things that stops growth of a crystal? Gravity. So there are certain drugs they can't grow in the ground, the crystals of these drugs, to study them. Well, along comes the space shuttle program. We can grow crystals in space much better because there's no gravity. And in fact, we had an anti-cancer drug on board called alpha interferon. It's used to treat right now some forms of leukemia, but it has terrible side effects, and we want to make a better drug. So by growing better crystals, we can do a better job of resolving some diseases. So that's an excellent example of why we go away from the face of the earth to improve lives on Earth and to resolve problems on Earth. Let me give you another humorous one that's actually kind of funny.
Spaceflight itself was really fun, but the most important thing to me and the most satisfying thing to me was the fact that the journey was so challenging and that it turned out to be so rewarding and successful. From the third grader drawing Crayola crayon drawings of spaceships until my selection as an astronaut, there were many obstacles I had to overcome, but I always knew that there was some goal, something down the road farther that I could achieve if I kept trying harder and harder. And it's a message I'd like all children to remember, that you can always shoot for a goal, shoot for the stars, aim for the stars, because no sky is too high.
Especially that father-in-law.
Yeah, and I bet the thing that's surprised you is that Peggy did a terrific job with no preparation.
That's right. She
Yeah.
enjoyed that.
Right.
Part of this experience is Peggy's getting all kinds of interesting experiences too.
Right.
And as Shannon grows up, she will too.
It was too bad we couldn't get her. Remember, she was sleeping that day, we couldn't get her in.
Right.
But what we're thinking of on this trip, Steve, and we do appreciate it when you come into town to give us your time, because we know it's limited, but we'd like to have the people know more about how it went. We know that you went to space since that last tape was made. Just exactly what did happen. I remember being down there, because Pat invited me, and that's when I first met you, and this came out of that thing, and we figured, boy, that's it. It's going to go. And all of a sudden, nothing.
That's right.
What happened?
Well, that's the closest we've ever come in the space program to launching and not actually getting off the pad. As you know, the engines start up before launch, those three main engines, and they're burning about 1,000 gallons of fuel a second. And those engines are running for 6 seconds so that the computers can make sure they're okay before we go. And about 2 seconds before launch, one of the engines indicated it wasn't exactly ready to go, even though it turns out it was okay to go.
Right.
So the computers generated a command to shut down. And as you know, the countdown clock had 6 zeros on it by the time those engines were shut down.
Yeah.
So we were within just a second or two of taking off. Inside the cockpit, you know, there was a lot of excitement. The alarms started going off.
The bells.
And I'd always thought that would be a real high anxiety time, but we had trained so many times to do that when those alarms went off, we just knew exactly to just walk through the steps like that.
I asked him earlier what would have happened had the rocket boosters been lit, and how they were just fractionally from it.
Yes.
explained that had they been on go, they would have listed no matter what. It would have taken it right out of the bracket.
It turns out we would have been okay.
You would have, but I remember, you were kind enough to come over to the luncheon and tell us some of these things, and one of the points you explained, I thought was rather significant, that suppose it did go off, and there was that difficulty. Now what? Could you get that thing back on the ground?
Well, we would have been okay because the engines would have actually kept running. It turns out all three were fine.
Oh.
But if we do lose an engine, it depends when we lose it, but yes, we can bring the shuttle either back to Florida or to Africa. That's one of the reasons before launch we have people in Africa. We actually send 2 astronauts over to Africa and Southwest Europe to make sure that the weather's good there in case the shuttle has to land there.
I see.
On launch.
Yeah.
So we send people to Ben Guerir in Spain and Morocco to make sure there are runways available there. You were speaking about the post-launch abort luncheon.
Yes.
That was one of the strangest experiences of my life because I never thought I would see 300 of my best friends on August 18th, 1994 because I was supposed to be in space. And in fact, the next day we went to a large amusement park down in Florida, Epcot Center.
Did you?
And we're riding certain rides like Space Mountain and things like that. And that, psychologically to me, was very strange because here I was paying money to go on these rides on Earth when in reality I was supposed to be going 17,000 miles an hour.
Yeah, you could have had a multi-million-dollar ride for nothing.
That's right.
Isn't that funny? Pat, where were you when this was happening?
Well, we were in a guest center about 3.5 miles away.
Uh-huh.
And like you, I was very perceptive of that plume that existed and the noise.
Right.
It certainly indicated that they were going to go, and the audience, when they realized that the thing had stopped, and everything shut down, just became very silent. We were sitting with Steve's dad and mother, who were just very excited about
I would imagine. What happens now?
Yeah, very calm.
Uh-huh.
They understood the mission as Steve had explained it, that it was under safeguards of all kinds.
Yeah.
And then we had a VIP astronaut with us explaining things, and he indicated that just be calm, everything's okay, we're all right. And then reassurance came from the audio system that everything's okay.
We actually
didn't go.
I had given my video camera to my best friend and asked him to videotape my parents and Peggy's parents during the launch. So we have video footage of Pat and Joan's response, and Bob and Lily, my parents' response. And I'll tell you, that made me appreciate what it's like to be a parent right then, because here they were looking at this space vehicle, rocking back and forth, all these flames, etc. And their little baby was on board. And so I've already told Shannon, who's 3, no rocket when she gets older. I don't want to go through anything like that myself, but it made me appreciate what it's like to be a parent. You should have seen the look on their face.
Yeah, for those unfamiliar with the whole process, among the audience was a half a dozen who were just overcome. Who were sobbing about not just the fact that it's gone, but the
tension from just doing it.
There would be smoke, there would be water, deluge water coming down. And we just follow the yellow brick road to these baskets. We jump in the baskets, hit a button, and they slide down this wire. It's about 200 feet vertical drop. You get up to about 60 miles per hour. That basket gets you quickly away from the space shuttle in case there was a fire or something. And then there's a bunker at the bottom. So we jump out of the basket, get in the bunker, and there's a communication system and rations, et cetera, in that bunker. But the good news about that whole board is that the system worked. You know, it made sure that we were not taking off with an engine that didn't work. Our families are very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for that. So it really was a demonstration of how well things work. Those engines are amazing. They produce 12 million horsepower each. They have 50,000 parts in each engine. And so I think they're among at least the top 5 most complicated, most spectacular mechanical devices in the world. And they're just incredible.
It's also rather interesting that they go to this extent for safety. In other words, they didn't think anything of shutting that down in 1.9 seconds, and yet they knew they probably just blew about, what, $10 million?
Well, $600,000.
Oh, yeah, but the point I'm making is the safety first.
That's right.
Yeah. So, Pat, why don't you come over and to get a little closer here, we'll ask Steve a little more detail about this.
Well, it was really gratifying 6 weeks later when we all went back down to view for the second time.
That one I didn't see.
So let me show you some footage of that. It's pretty exciting. We do have some massive footage. And as you know, I wanted you to see this today.
Take off from the crew quarters. It's a fairly standard scene, I guess. Jump on the Astrovan and head out to the pad where we get on board about 2.5 hours before launch. You'll see in just a second the water deluge coming down, the engine starting, and this time starting for good. A little twang, and again, when the solid rocket motors ignite, you're going out of town very quickly. It's a beautiful launch. Felt great on board. Jumped right up to 2.5 Gs, did our roll maneuver, throttled down, and had a very, I guess, nominal ascent. No failures of any sort. Is very nice.
It's the ascent, and the expression we were kicked off the pad is an accurate one. Here's a pretty spectacular view of us penetrating a cloud layer. During our ascent, you can see the reflection off the clouds. And the dark line off to the left there is, of course, the shadow from our exhaust plume. It took us 8.5 minutes to get to space. Here come the solid rockets being kicked off the ET. If you watch carefully, you can see their exhaust tail off. And 8.5 minutes later, after liftoff, of course, we get rid of the ET tank and we're in space.
What was it like when you made this shot into the space?
Oh, I love talking about it. You can probably tell from the smile on my face. Pat's probably heard this more than once.
Love it every time.
It's the highlight of the trip in many ways is the launch because it's very exciting. There's a lot of anticipation when the vehicle finally leaves the face of the Earth. There's a lot of vibration. You feel a lot of force on your body. You actually thrust back into your seat. You experience about 3 times your body weight for a part of the ascent. Tremendous vibration. As an engineer, I was personally excited to think about what was going on in the back of the boat. You know, that 1,000 gallons of fuel per second that I was talking about. The build-up from being on the launch pad to 17,000 miles an hour, 8.5 minutes later. Tremendous vibration. It's hard to talk to each other because of that vibration and the pressure on your chest.
Hard to breathe?
It's hard to breathe because, again, it's as if someone's pushing on your chest.
Yeah.
And from an outsider looking in, I always thought, well, it's probably very technical language, and it's, you know, it's very quiet, it's very technical, and for the most part it is. But when I listen to our personal tape of us talking to each other, there's that yippee every once in a while, and
yeah, still a thrill.
Isn't this fun? And so there's still that really personal inside jokes and comments and things as you're going into space. And isn't this fun? So for that 8.5 minutes, it's very a lot of pressure on you. A lot of vibration, but at 8.5 minutes the engine shut off and you're instantly in 0 gravity. And so instantly the seatbelt straps just float up. And if there's anything on you, like a pencil or a camera or a book, one of our checklists, it instantly will start to float. And that first 3 or 5 minutes you feel a lot like a clown. I mean, you can imagine right now if I just removed gravity from you, how strange it would be. Because, you know, you think, well, I'm going to come out of my seat if I push. Well, you probably would push too hard because you've never experienced before. So you would rocket up to the ceiling. You'd have to put your arms over your head because you'd crash into the ceiling. And that's what happens for the rookies. So you look at the veterans. We had 4 veterans and 2 rookies. And the veterans were very easy on their motion, very slow, and the rookies were pushing all over the place, going over there, and we, you know, crash into this and crash into that. And the veterans, they maybe said 1 or 2 comments the first couple of days. But after a while, I kind of looked around and realized all the veterans were just pushing off the walls with 1 finger. And here I was using my whole hand to push on. And, you know, inevitably I would be out of control. Really. And, you know, my feet would be flying past people's faces. But once you got your sea legs, we'll call them, it was really magical. And that's the word that I've come to use. It's like a magic show. And, you know, you can just imagine picking up the television set or that kitchen table with just 2 fingers. You just pull them and just pick it up and let go of it, and it would float there. That's almost impossible for you to imagine right here because it's just so unbelievable. And as an engineer and scientist, being in that atmosphere and seeing that environment and seeing 100-pound things just floating makes you realize why scientists like it. For years, we've been able to control temperatures and pressures and voltages and durations of the experiment. But here's another parameter, gravity, that you can control. You can take it away. And, you know, if you were to ask me, Steve, can you pass me that couch over there? I could do it. Just pick it up a little bit and just barely push it to you. Or if you felt like it was getting a little crowded here with Pat and I, we're tired of our company. You could go up to that ceiling 25 feet up there and just sit there, be by yourself.
Isn't that interesting? I noticed in some of your tapes, because I watched them, that you're spinning some things.
Yeah.
Some stayed right in that position, but others tend to drift down and wobble. Is there any gravity there at all?
No, there's no gravity, but if you're trying to spin something, if you spin it perfectly, it would spin right here. But you can't spin it perfectly.
No.
When you flip it like this, inevitably you, what we call, impart a velocity on it, so it'll float away. It's not from gravity points that way, it's because when I spun it, it's impossible to spin it perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing I was going to mention before I forget is, inside the cockpit is this magical feeling that things float. And they'll spin forever. If you start something spinning, it'll spin forever. But when you look out the window is the other magical part. I mean, you look back at the Earth, and it's really a spiritual thing. And I don't necessarily mean religiously, but it's just very deep spiritually. You look at the Earth, and it's gorgeous. And it's round, just like you've always heard it is.
You can't see the mountain.
But to see it is spectacular, and the beautiful colors, and to see this very small, fragile island in space. It really is an island. We try and teach the kids, especially the younger ones, I'd say up to 8th grade or so, that you need to respect the environment. And the way I tell them, I try and make them identify with this, I say, now if you lived on an island, you'd have to be nice to your neighbors, you'd have to be good to the environment, because this is all you have. These are all the resources you have. And these are the only people that you have also. Well, we live on an island. And the adults, I can see them sometimes roll their eyes a little bit and say, well, that's really stretching it. Baloney. When you look at the Earth from space, it's an island. And the Apollo people, who were much farther away from Earth, could see the whole ball. We were 120 miles up. They were up to 220,000 miles away when they went to the moon. I mean, they took those famous pictures where you see that blue ball in space. It's an island. When I see adults, they kind of get that strange look on their face when I say it's not. I say, it is absolutely an island.
Subject, Steve, I remember again, when you were talking, you gave some idea of what the total program cost, and it's equivalent to a very small total. What was that illustration you gave?
It was, that launch pad afford was a good opportunity to educate my set of friends, 200, 300 people, and their families, and hopefully they'll go out and spread the word of their community. But it turns out that our budget this year was around $14 billion, which sounds like a lot of money. On a personal scale, it is. But in the United States budget, it turns out that that's a very small amount. And in effect, less than 1 penny per tax dollar.
That was the illustration.
And surveys, the $14 billion sounds like a lot, but surveys show that the average American thinks that our budget's $200 billion. So there's an obvious misconception there. Just to help quantify how much 1% of the American budget is, that budget that says $14 million, less than 1% of the federal budget, we spend about 4 times that on tobacco products every year. And that's also actually about the same amount we spend on cosmetics every year as Americans. I think we spend about 6 times that on jewelry in the United States, and you know where I got that information. My brother-in-law. The language barrier is killing us. I mean, it takes 10 times as long to do something. You and I can negotiate for face-to-face very effectively, but it takes 10 times as long with this language barrier.
One of Steve's best friends went to Russia to be on that Russian part of the program involved with us. And after many, many weeks, determining that he wanted to be gone, and had to come home.
Is that right?
He was actually there 5 months. But the interesting thing I was going to tell you about the Russian program is Norm Thager lived on the Russian space station for about 3 or 4 months. And after a space flight, we always come back to the office and debrief, tell them all the lessons learned. It's good for the people who haven't flown. It's good for the veterans. I learned a lot from what he had to say. But he said that in the 3 years that he was training and actually flying on this program, he said, clearly the hardest thing, and the thing that we underestimated the most, was the language skills that he needed. He went to something called the Defense Language Institute, DLI. That's where the United States government teaches military personnel how to speak the language, so it's an immersion program.
Right.
And he said after that year, he was still only probably, and he's a very, very astute person. He's a very sharp guy. He said that he was still only about 60 or 70% of the way on the real capability he needed. And we don't have time to go train for a year just on language. I mean, he was totally out of the loop on technical things. And so that's the biggest barrier. And it's the same thing with the negotiations with Russia right now. They're proposing a change to the sequence with which we will build the space station now, the International Space Station it's called. And in fact, it's in today's paper, as you said, Pat. And they're proposing a small change in the sequence that would benefit them and save them money. And to negotiate that's going to take months. And after we negotiate it, then we'll have to go to Congress and explain it to them if we decide to change something.
By the loop, you were suggesting that it's going to take time to understand all the way that in the parameters. Is it such that we are superior with our progress than others by lack of language interpretation, or trying to protect us or understand more what we're doing?
No, I think each country, there's several nations in the world that have space programs, and they've gone down different paths. It's not necessarily that one's superior. I would say we have more advanced technology in the human space flight than other countries. But the Russians, who have kept their technology very simple, have much more real-time experience. They have many more people hours in space than we do. So each of us brings our own piece of the puzzle to the puzzle. Now, we're the major players because the major financial backer of the space station, and the space shuttle is the major player, et cetera, et cetera. But these negotiations, when you get together, are so painful because each party has been doing their own thing for 25 or 30 years. The Russians have been doing their own thing for that many years. And then you have new nations that are new spacefaring nations, like the Japanese have become big players the last several years. And Canada, Italy, Germany, France, who have been players for, between 1 and 10 years now. And so they're bringing new information too. So it's exciting, but it's painful sometimes. And with the way budgets are going, the only way we're going to have large space programs in the future is with us all working together. There's no way America is going to go to Mars by itself in the next 50 years. We have to have other people with us.
How long will the current design or structure of the shuttle or its component parts be adequate?
Most people are really surprised to hear that the shuttle will fly another 25 years. It's designed to fly until 2020. Endeavour, which I flew on, that was its 7th flight. Its first flight was in 1989, so it will have flown about 30, 35 years by the time it's retired.
You might notice something, Steve, on one of your tapes that shows a tile that's missing along the border of your bay. Is that still a problem? I remember when they were new, it was a serious problem. Are they still fighting that one?
No. On the bottom of the shuttle, you have these thousands of tiles that basically absorb or reflect the heat as we come back into the atmosphere.
Right.
And in the early days, the bonding process was not very robust. Now, none of them usually fall off. The tile that you saw fell off was actually on the roof, which is not a critical area. What we think happened is that some ice came off with a large external tank, which has super cold hydrogen liquid in it, hydrogen and oxygen liquid in it on launch. Came off to knock that off. So, but in fact, if you look at the launch video, they think they can identify the point that it actually was knocked off.
What are the chances of an astronaut? Now, you're going to be going out in space on this next trip. What's the chance of an astronaut getting hit with part of that?
Well, once we're on orbit, the debris coming off the vehicle is minimal.
Yeah, that's right.
We do still have to worry about micrometeorites coming into us.
Right.
And that's why we wear those special spacesuits with several layers. I think it's 12 or 13 layers of materials like Kevlar and Nomex, which are used in bulletproof vests. To keep the debris from impacting us. So, now my first flight, I didn't get to do that. I was hoping to. I was one of the people trained.
That's what I understood. You were going to be one of the walkers.
That's right. Yeah. But on that flight, we had a payload in the cargo bay that was not deployed or retrieved. It was stationary.
Right.
So it was not something that we had to go out and work on, like we're going down the Hubble Space Telescope. It was a radar designed to study the Earth. So it was a very advanced radar that we were testing in hopes that the technology would work, so that in the future we could use that technology on a permanently orbiting platform. So the idea is to take something called the Space Radar Lab, which we took, and to permanently orbit it so that it can study the Earth every day. And to explain the Space Radar Lab, it was an advanced radar system that was used to study the Earth. And it did many, many things. and I can give you a couple of examples. Seeing the snow outside the window and a vast amount of water out there, it reminds me of one of the, say, 80 things it does. Right now, to measure the snowpack in certain areas, and I'm from California, so I think of the Sierra Nevada. Right now, to study the water that we have available for the next season, we have to go measure the snowpack. So what we do now is people go on skis, and they go out and sample the snow in certain areas. They use some mathematical formula to determine that California has this many million gallons of water available for the next 9 months. Well, that's clearly very archaic, very inaccurate, sending people out on skis. Well, this Space Radar Lab, it could actually, with its radar, measure the depth of snowpack instantaneously. You could fly over California in 15 seconds. Measure the depth of the snowpack throughout the Sierras, and also measure the water content. You know, snow can be very wet or very dry. This is a dry snow we're having now. So with that instantaneous measure of the depth and moisture, you can get the exact amount of water available to Californians. I mean, that's a huge leap for people on skis to this other measurement. Another example, again, we're talking about water because it's the focus of life for me. Another one of the several things this radar can do is the radar wavelengths that we were using can actually penetrate cloud cover and very dry dirt or sand. So when you have a radar or a satellite going over the world right now, weather radar, if there's clouds, they can't see what's going on underneath. This radar could actually penetrate the clouds and the dry sand and see what's happening underneath, and I'll show you some footage about that. So, for example, if we're flying over the Sahara Desert, which is the biggest desert in the world, if you look at a world map, it's incredible how big the Sahara is. We can shoot the radar through the dry sand to see what's underneath. Well, as the video shows, what's underneath is riverbeds. So when I think of the Sahara, I think of, you know, parchment, dry, no vegetation. Well, the video shows that it used to be a very lush area full of riverbeds, and which is a fascinating thing to understand. It makes you think, my gosh, something happened there on the face of the earth where it used to be very lush and now it's dry. And why is that important? It's important because we want to understand what happened there so that other places in the world that doesn't happen.
Won't turn to desert, right. And that also explains something that's been a mystery to me, is why is there oil under the desert? Well, if it was lush at one time, then all that vegetation has created the
organic material.
That's interesting. And you can see through the clouds.
That's right.
Bill is a ceramic engineer, probably closely related to geology and understanding.
It's very interesting.
Firsthand.
Well, I always wondered why down in the desert they have all that oil. There's no vegetation to do this. But I'm thinking in terms of years as we know them.
That's right.
Down there, you got to be talking about thousands of years when that happened.
That's right.
Well, California alone would probably fight for this mission, wouldn't they? You just
That's right.
The water content.
Yeah.
Widely concerned about availability over the years.
That's right. I mean, again, one of many, many things that this radar did. I don't want to give you the idea it did 2 or 3 things. It did hundreds of things. And if we can put one into space permanently, I have no doubt we will. I have no doubt we will. You know, it might be 10 years from now rather than a year from now. It'll really benefit life again. And again, you have direct spin-offs and indirect spin-offs from the space program. That's a direct spin-off. That will
help us right now.
That's right. Whereas the other things I've talked about, the medical benefits, those are things that just happen to fall out of the space program, not intentionally.
But they're there. I read country from the work they're doing up there with that Hubble, but what are the international implications? Are the other countries benefiting by this?
But yeah, actually, the way the Hubble works is, it has a timeline. So as it's operating, we have 24 hours a day to fulfill, and an institute called the Space Telescope Institute takes requests from scientists worldwide for time on the shuttle. So a scientist from France can contact the Hubble Space Telescope Institute with a proposal that says, I need this many hours of viewing, this is what I want to look at, and this is the instrument on board Hubble that I want to use. So people actually apply for time. So it can be from other countries. I think most of the applicants are Americans right now, but it can be international. Because everyone in the world is interested in astronomy, where we came from, what's happening out there. That natural inside feeling of exploration is, of course, worldwide.
And then do we have access to whatever they learn on their
Absolutely.
time? And And how about vice versa? Can they tap our information?
Yes, I think when someone comes to us, they're called the principal investigator, and they have use of the information for a certain amount of time. I think it's on the order of several months where they don't have to make it available to everyone else. But at some point, because of the way the Hubble Space Telescope works financially, they have to make that information available.
I see.
It's responsible for the anticipation of things we may not really have a handle on yet, 10, 20 years down the road. Whether it be medicine or the necessity to fly further, to look at Mars as a possibility. How do we go about that? Is there a program at NASA that's designated as the futuristic element?
Absolutely. And just as the Hubble Space Telescope works, people come to us and they say, we think in 15 years this is what we should be looking at. We think in 35 years this is what we should be looking at. And they apply, and we have people, and we actually ask for outside advice. These are the proposals we have, how should we spend our money? And of course, as budgets have shrunk, that process has become even more competitive. And when you look at the span of time, the Wright brothers only flew 93 years ago, and the anniversary was just last week. I think it's December 17th. So in 93 years, we've gone from flying this little airplane, very rickety airplane, only several hundred feet, to flying in space regularly at 17,000 miles an hour, to using a telescope to look out billions of light years away. So in only 90 years that's happened. It's pretty interesting to think, where will we be 90 years from now? That's why when people ask me, hey, will we go to Mars? Will we have a space station? Will we go back to the moon? I always say, absolutely.
You have to believe.
We will. We absolutely will.
Tell them how long it takes to go to Mars. That's
Well, using conventional rocketry, it would take 9 months to go there.
Yeah.
So you can imagine being in a very small capsule for 9 months out and 9 months back.
I
It
heard
creates
Katie say.
some interesting problems. You know, just psychologically, how will you get along with your partner?
Right.
What happens if someone gets sick 8 months from Earth?
Yeah.
Okay, so you have to have medical capabilities that we don't have right now on the space shuttle. On the space shuttle, we can come home. Well, if someone has an appendicitis problem 8 months from Earth, what do we do?
I heard Peggy, our daughter, say that if you go, she goes.
That would be a big sacrifice.
That'd be it.
To be away from your family because once you get there, you'll want to stay there for a while.
Sure. Steve, in the ordinary time of selection and how the process goes, can you tell us how many astronauts have been involved from the beginning and how many remain, and apparently their obligations?
Sure. When our class was selected in 1992, there were 19 Americans selected. That brought the number to about 215 of American astronauts over all of time. And I was the first in my class selected for a flight. It turns out I was the 200th American in space, so there's been about 200 Americans. I think the total number of humans in space is close to about 300 in all time. Right now there are about 100 astronauts, and we select about every 2 years about 20. And the selection process is a lot like a normal job interview application process. You're looking for someone who's kind of well-rounded. They're not only good academically, they have good business credentials, they communicate well, they're fun to get along with. If you're going to fly in space with someone for anywhere from 11 days to 9 months if you're going to Mars.
They don't have to be in the military, do they?
No. So you're looking for someone who's kind of has this package, good perseverance, good communication skills, good education. And in the previous years, in the very early stages of the program, they also had to have a military background. Now it's about 50-50. About 50% have a military background, about 50% are civilians, and I come from the civilian field, as you know. Most are still pilots. I'm a privately educated pilot. About 30% are women, 70% men, and that 30% reflects the percentage of applicants who are women. So that's why it's a little bit lower than society's division of men and women. So we try and remind children that, you know, you can be a private pilot, or you can be a military person, you can be a man or a woman, very ethnic, diverse corps now. And the average number of flights is about 3. Usually fly about 3 times, maybe 4. We have people who've flown 5 times.
And why put a limit on it? With that experience, why wouldn't you just keep using it?
Well, there's that cost-risk benefit. For me personally, it comes down to communicating with Peggy. You know, are you willing for me to fly one more time? Are you willing to take
the stress that comes with that and the risk with the benefits. So we see ourselves going down that path. I think this will be my second flight, and after that flight, we'll talk about it again. I'd love to fly 5 or 6 times, but, you know, with the children now and understanding what Peggy goes through. My current job, I work at the Cape Kennedy, so I support all the launches. So I am with the spouses for each launch, and that's been very eye-opening to see it from Peggy's perspective, to be with the families there. On one of these trips to the Cape, I actually got to spend a lot of time with Jacques Cousteau, who was there at my invitation, and let me tell you a little bit about that tie-in. Before my flight, I thought, well, this is an excellent opportunity to go back and thank all the people who have helped me and influenced me in my life. And of course, the main connection there is family and friends and my parents. So it was a very unique opportunity to thank those people and to say, you know, I'd like you to participate in this event. If there's certain friends that you'd like to show some acknowledgement to, please invite them. So that was neat. And I also kind of went beyond that, and I thought to myself, who really influenced my career choice? And for me, it was very easy. There were 3 people when I was growing up. One was Jacques Cousteau, you know, the undersea world of Jacques Cousteau and his efforts to explore what we'll call inner space, which is the waters of the world or the oceans of the world. And so he was very influential. And the second one was Charles Lindbergh. Even though he had passed away, or his major accomplishments had been earlier than my life, his aviation exploits and his efforts to explore the world and to establish airline routes and things like that was also very influential on me. And a third was Lloyd Bridges in Sea Hunt. I used to watch Sea Hunt all the time. So what I did is I tracked down Jacques Cousteau and went through the Cousteau Society and ended up inviting him to my launch, which he could not make. He actually made the launch after mine, which worked out better because I actually got to spend some time with him, which is documented in the Calypso log. But I asked him what I could take of his on my flight as a tribute to him, and he gave me one of his red caps, those red Calypso knit hats that they wore, and I did a tribute to him from space for being a positive influence on me. I'm an astronaut because of Jacques Cousteau, and there's an absolute tie in there. Same thing with the Lindbergh family. Of course, he was deceased at the time of my flight, but I contacted his family and became very good friends with his family. And his daughter, Reeve, who was a children's book author, became very good friends with me. And she gave me his reading glasses that he actually had at the birth of all their children. And I took that with me on my flight, and again, did a tribute to him because, again, I'm an astronaut because of Charles Lindbergh. And Anne Morrow Lindbergh is his wife, and their explorations together as a family. And so I spent some time with Jacques Cousteau after the flight, and am still in contact with him and hoping to take my exploration of outer space and my experiences in outer space with his explorations of inner space and somehow bring those together. And we have some interesting ideas on that. With the Lindbergh family, I've continued to be involved with them, and they have a foundation that's called the Lindbergh Foundation that looks at granting money to people who are doing projects that are environmentally aware. We actually spent Mother's Day with Charles Lindbergh's wife, Anne Morrow Lindbergh. Peggy and I went to Connecticut and spent Mother's Day with them and attended a function up there with them. And so that's been my way of saying thank you not only to my parents, but my friends, my in-laws, and their friends, and to these very influential sources. My high school calculus teacher, who was at my launch, Marvin Lamborn, I tracked him down. And it took me way too many years to thank him, but that was my way of thanking him for his positive influence and getting me interested in math.
Did you tell Lloyd Bridges?
No, you know, it's funny. I can't really explain why I didn't track him down.
Yeah.
But I'd like to on the next flight.
Yeah, but his name's in the phone book.
Yeah.
Steve did track me down after the launch. He gave me a watch
That's right.
I took with him. And critically, I suggest to other people that once their automobile reaches 100,000 miles, maybe it's been done, but this watch has about 4.5 million miles on it.
Still clicking.
Still good.
That's a good point. Well, now, I have a question, Steve. How does the training and how do you find the actual, and how do they compare? Could you give us a feel on that?
About 70% of my job is training, so studying to be an astronaut. Training, throw which switches, how to react to emergency situations, how to take pictures of the Earth, how to cook the food, how to use the space toilet, how to communicate with the public and media opportunities. So much of my job is for training. It turns out that once you're in space, about 95% of it is just like they trained you. so we've been in simulators where the switches are exactly right, where we know how to use all those devices I told you about, how to react to emergencies, the launch pad board that we talked about. It was very easy to react to because we have practiced it so many times, step by step. And in fact, you don't even think about it. You just react. It's as much as if, like driving a car.
Yeah.
When you go out to your car, you don't think about, okay, I have to stick the key in the ignition, I have to turn it, then I have to put it into drive. You just do that. And that 1,500 switches in the shuttle. And so you just do that. Now, the 5% is the zero G, the zero gravity. That's almost impossible on Earth to teach you what it's like to live in zero gravity, what it's like to just touch the wall and go flying. But the human body and mind is incredible. You learn that very quickly. And I would say within a day or two, you've got that learned. So even though we can't really emulate that on Earth, it's so easy to learn in space, and it happens so quickly that you don't need to worry about that deal. Now, in our spacewalks, those we have to train a little bit more for, because we're in zero gravity and we're actually turning screwdrivers and turning wrenches. And of course, as you turn a screwdriver, you turn the opposite way. So we do have to do a little bit more awareness training of that. So we'll be in swimming pools for probably on the order of hundreds of hours before the flight practicing the spacewalks. And in fact, for 2 weeks last October, I was in a 40-foot deep swimming pool at the Marshall Space Flight Center in Alabama practicing spacewalks. I had about 28 hours underwater there, where they put a mock-up of Hubble in the water. I put my spacesuit on, get in and practice the exact things we're doing today. But again, I'm almost certain when I get to Hubble, which I never will have seen until I work on it, which is an interesting thought. I'll be working on this billion-dollar vehicle I've never seen before. So I'll bet you when I get there, it'll be like I've been there before.
And how close will you get to it? How close will the ship get to the Hubble?
The arm that we use is about 45 feet long. So the shuttle will get very close to the vehicle, to Hubble, and we have this arm that'll reach out and grab it.
I see.
And then it'll put it in the back of the shuttle, we'll anchor it to us, then we'll go out the door on 4 different occasions and work on the Hubble Space Telescope. But I'm almost certain it'll be exactly the same. I'll feel so comfortable
doing it. And are you on some kind of a tether so that you have some safety?
Yes. We're always tethered to the shuttle. It's a very small wire that we're actually up to.
And about 6 hours out in space each time?
Yes, each spacewalk is 2 people, and you're out for, on average, about 5 and 5.5 hours, but we have the capability for 7 hours.
What's the most aggressive incident out there?
As we descended further, the pressure on our bodies mounted. The engine of the soft landing started up, and we hit the ground and turned to one side. The hatch opened, and we saw the sky and human faces peeking in. I had lost coordination. My body, arms, and legs were terribly heavy. Dear Earth, how heavy you are, sitting on my shoulders. Valley Reunion.